Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Hemsley Fraser's podcast, the L&D Leaders Lounge. My name is John Shepherd and I'm delighted to be joined today by Laura Walker and Ben George. Welcome both. We are talking today about connectedness. And Laura, we're going to talk first of all about the importance of human connection. If I could just ask you why you think human connection is so crucial in the workplace.
Well, to be honest, John, I think it's crucial everywhere, not just in the workplace. So it's a very basic human need. So as humans, we are wired for connection. And if we're disconnected for whatever reason, it can have quite profound circumstances. But specifically in a workplace, I think it's particularly relevant. So given the environment around uncertainty and prolonged uncertainty that people are experiencing, but also new ways of working, it does bring different challenges with it around how do we build connection and maintain that connectedness with each other, so between human beings, but also with a shared purpose and a shared agenda. So I think basically I'm saying I think it's even more important than ever for rational reasons, but also for emotional reasons.
Perfect. Ben, would you agree with that? Is that what you see both in the workplace and outside of the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's become more relevant than ever to focus on building connections and connectedness, certainly in the workplace, and particularly in the context of sort of a post-COVID hybrid model that a lot of organizations have adopted. And I think we could probably talk about some of the consequences and benefits of those things for a long time, but certainly it's become apparent in the work that we do with our clients that connections and building connectedness needs to be a priority for organizations and leaders and for everybody to take some accountability for that.
Great. And Ben, within that context, you mentioned working with our clients and the work that we do. Could you share some experiences that you've had or what you've seen really that does highlight that impact of genuine connections at work?
Yeah, so it one of the privileges that we get to experience, I guess, is, you know, we work with a variety of clients in different industries all around the world. And, you know, this question reminds me of, you know, really, I think most, if not all of the programs that we run where we have these connections, whether it's directly with the client that's helping us to build solutions, or it could be in a workshop with leaders in different locations. All of the best experiences come where people feel connected. And when I say best experiences, where there's meaning and genuine learning happening, where people feel comfortable to move outside their comfort zone in those spaces, and we can challenge one another and have a sort of a psychologically safe environment to work with. Some specific examples that I remember that come to mind was during the COVID years, and the experience where we were suddenly thrust into these environments that we weren't used to when we were locked down and isolated. So it was in some respects more exaggerated, but the experiences and that legacy has sort of continued to some degree. And I remember running workshops, particularly with certain organizations, where the workshop, particularly around some of the content areas that we're working with around resilience and leading remote teams and working in remote teams and giving people that kind of support at the time. I remember the feeling that people had, and the learning point from those workshops was more around how we connected as a group in the workshop rather than exploring the tactics. That was the overriding feeling and outcome from it. So yeah, those were a real delight to be around. We still obviously focused on building connections in our workshops so we can get to effective outcomes and people feel safe. But yeah, I remember those vivid experiences, and people becoming quite emotional who were actually quite isolated, having this opportunity to talk about stuff that was meaningful and useful to them. So yeah, really sort of visceral and visible experiences for folks. So it's super important.
Yeah, one of the things you just said there, Ben, made me think about different organisations that I've worked in. So having worked in lots of different industries, there's two things I've noticed about that. So one is that the human connectedness and the need for human connection is common across all different companies that I've worked in, globally, locally, different industries, so in engineering as much as it is in pharmaceuticals or in retail. But there is a slightly different flavour sometimes, depending on the culture of the organisation. So one of the organisations that I worked with for about 6 years was a company called the John Lewis Partnership, which is a retail, large 90,000 people retail organisation here in the UK. And it is a partnership. So the people own the organisation in trust, basically. And the nature of the relationships and the depth of connection there is like nowhere else that I have ever worked. And what you see is that flows through into the customer service. So the fact that people really feel that sense of ownership and in it together and part of a really strong family culture, it really flows through into not just the interactions with each other, but with the interactions with customers and how they see the organisation and how they see accountability as a whole mindset, basically. So I think it's fascinating that it's a common need across all organisations that I've ever worked with, but sometimes you do get a slightly different flavour. So things like whether friendships are encouraged in an organisation or not, whether it's more of a rational connection with a sense of purpose or a shared mission, or whether it is more of a being in a team and a tight-knit team, or whether it's a tribal type organisation. I know we've talked about this before, Ben. So I think it's a common need, but there is perhaps some nuance within particular workplaces that's interesting.
Yeah, that really is. In fact, Laura, I was listening to a conversation the other day, and someone from a creative industry background was saying that the human connection, the way that works, is really important to the creative process, and like innovation is really important. Human connection is really important within an innovation context. So that's great. We're going to move on also now then and talk a little bit about how it's important and maybe different across different organizations in terms of fostering human connections to both individual but also collective well-being and productivity. I mean, you touched on it a bit there, Laura, within John Lewis Partnership, but could you talk a little bit more about that more broadly?
Well, I think if I pick up on the collective productivity and the link between connectedness and collective productivity, there's a huge amount of research that shows that if people feel safe, psychologically safe, that has an impact on mistake reporting, on creativity, on innovation, on accountability, on mutual support, and on avoiding throwing things over the wall, basically, in terms of accountability. So, you know, there is a lot of evidence that shows up, particularly around things like innovation, mistakes, avoiding or calling out risks. So avoiding big, potentially big issues for an organisation. So that there is a chunk of stuff there. Interestingly, so in my PhD research, I'm researching fulfilling work and what makes fulfilling work. And work well-being is a really important part of that. And the felt sense. So there's some practical things about, are you sick? Are you well? You know, what's your physical health like? But it's really a felt sense. So do I feel connected? Do I feel valued? Do I feel listened to? And there's some really important elements within that make a difference collectively. And we know that from the work around engagement. So my ideas are valued. I can grow my skills, really collect very strongly with engagement and performance. And then similarly, as an individual, do I feel that I'm valued and I'm likely to stay as a consequence? So it's a very complex picture. I think there's a number of different aspects that feed into work well-being and through the link into productivity. But connectedness, definitely, and feeling connected to each other and also something bigger than ourselves is a really important part of that.
I think it's worth thinking about the impact of not being connected as well, and it's quite staggering as well what the researchers sort of pulled out on that. So a recent government study pointed to close to $1.6 billion across the UK that is impacted by essentially workplace isolation and people feeling lonely or isolated, in the work that they do, contributing to things like, well-being, productivity decreases, and so on and so forth, ill health. And in fact, it's been equated to being more of a challenge to physical health, or equated to the same extent as cigarettes and smoking. So there's a huge impact on not just performance, mental well-being, but also physical health as well. And it's a serious topic. It was a challenge for our sort of society and culture pre-COVID. It seems to have exacerbated somewhat since sort of the COVID experience and post-COVID, where we are now.
So would you, Ben, just to follow up on that, would you then, so it's not really a question of recognizing its importance, it's actually a question of it's crucial to everything that organizations of any sort are doing.
Yeah, it's crucial. And what's interesting about it is that loneliness comes with this stigma of shame. If you're lonely, there's something wrong with you. So I like the idea of connectedness, because it gives us access to the conversation where some people might find talking about loneliness and isolation being somewhat stigmatized. And of course it isn't. It's feeling lonely is a human condition that we all experience, and essentially it's a warning signal to us that we need to go out and find connections. The irony with feeling isolated and lonely is that we often do the exact opposite of what we need to. We withdraw. So it can be quite pernicious as well as pervasive in our team. So I think the question isn't, is my team or is my organization experiencing isolation? It is, and it's finding out where it is and what can we do about it.
Yeah, and I think the clue's in the name, really. So around human connectedness, and lack of human connectedness and the impact that can have.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that we need to be aware of is that all connections are not the same in terms of the quality of the connection, and often it is quality over quantity that makes the difference, and we all know that around some of the research around social media, for example. So I don't think this is, the beauty of this work is, in a way, is that it's so well understood, as a human being, we know this is important. We all know it, we've always known it. Sometimes we forget about it, but I think that, it's a really important topic, and we know it is.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both for your time. That's a really interesting, insightful overview, if you like, of the topic. And we like in these conversations to always keep it add a practical element, shall we say. So in our next conversation, we're going to move on to how leaders can actually nurture and encourage real connections. So thank you both for your time.